This hydro dipping question comes from one of our YouTube viewers, and they asked, do you know if you can hydro dip 3D printed PLA plastic parts without flame treatment? Great question. I don't think we've ever talked about 3D printed parts here on the channel. Y'all got questions? I got answers. Let's do it. So the question that was asked is, do you know if you can hydro dip 3D printed PLA plastic parts without flame treatment? I initially responded back and said I flame treat everything, because I do, which we're going to talk about here in a second. But he responded back and said, thanks for the reply. Do you ever actually dip PLA before, which is 3D printed material? I wasn't sure if it needed an undercoat, as I have different PLA colors, so I can just use a clear primer plus dip over the top. I wasn't sure if the flame treatment can be avoided if I'm just spraying plastic primer first. So we got a lot of stuff going on, and let's cover all about 3D printed parts first. I am not an expert in the 3D printing world. I don't know about all the materials used, but I know so far the ones that I have seen here in my shop have all been some type of plastic. I've had no issue dipping any of these 3D printed plastics thus far, and I treat them just like I do any other plastic. I have a full video that goes into a lot of detail and explanation about how I prep plastics and the flame treatment process. In that video, I show you an example of how you can figure out whether something needs to be flame treated or not. But for me, anything that's plastic, I flame treat, just so I don't have to worry about if it should be done or not. Just flame treat everything, and everything works fine. After flame treating, I always sandblast everything. That is the most efficient and effective way to make sure that the paint that I'm going to use is going to have the best surface to bond to on my parts that I'm going to be dipping. Can you get away with not sandblasting? Yeah, it depends though. A lot of these 3D printed objects that are coming out these days have a lot of little small nooks and crannies that are just going to be really hard for you to get to with either sandpaper or a Scotch-Brite pad, and the only way to make sure that you can get into all those nooks and crannies and get them etched and prepped properly is to sandblast them. My recommendation is always going to be to sandblast first. If you don't have access to a sandblaster, or you want to try to get around it and just do it by hand with sandpaper or a Scotch-Brite pad, that's on you. I'm not saying that it's wrong, but it's not what I would do. So the other part of his question was, I wasn't sure if I needed an undercoat, as I have different color PLA, so I can just use clear primer plus dip. I don't know about clear primers. The only clear primer I know of is going to be adhesion promoter. I've never dipped straight to adhesion promoter. It's not something that I use in my shop because the paint that I use is one hit wonder, and it has adhesion promoter and primer already built into it. Now, what I am familiar with is clear intercoats, and One Hit Wonder has one that I've used quite a few times to keep the original base coat color of something without actually having to repaint it. You just spray a few coats of intercoat over the top of it, and I've got a video that I'll link to right up here that goes into a lot of detail about how to do that particular process. I just prefer to have a good base coat of paint on it to make sure everything is one solid color and one solid sheen, but that's just me. You can do it however you want. And then the last thing he asked was, he wasn't sure if the flame treatment can be avoided if you're spraying a plastic primer first. Now, this is just me and my opinion only, but to me, primer is primer. It doesn't matter if it goes on plastic, aluminum, metal, or glass. It's just primer. There's nothing special about it that makes it stick to plastic any better than it does anything else. If something needs to be flame treated in order for paint or primer or anything else to stick to it permanently, then it needs to be flame treated. In the hydro dipping hobby and the hydro dipping business, prep is 99% of what makes your final product. You can have the most gorgeous finish in the whole world, but if it's not gonna last because you skipped on prep, then what was the point in doing it in the first place? I'm a firm believer that there's a right tool for every job, and when it comes to plastics, flame treating is not something I'm willing to skimp on just to save a few minutes of time. And I'm gonna get on my soapbox here for just a second, but I see so many comments and I get a lot of emails and questions, and people are just always trying to find ways to shortcut the process of hydro dipping. If you go search YouTube for other professional hydro dipping companies like Jim from K2 Concepts or Brian over at Liquid Concepts, yeah, we may all do things just a little bit different or use a little bit different products, but when it comes to prep, all of our prep process is exactly the same. And the reason that we all do this exactly the same is because we found that these set procedures for prep are the best way to do things that give you the best finish and the best possibility of durability over the long term. I know that for all of us in the professional hydro dipping world, we teach you how to do this the right way, not because we want to sell you products or because we want you to go out and buy a sandblaster. It's because we're trying to save you headaches later on down the road. We've all been there at one point where we've tried to shortcut a process and we learn the hard way when the customer brings something back because the coating failed. But I find that people spend way too much time trying to find shortcuts and ways around doing this the right way. When it comes to any kind of coatings, whether it be hydro dip, painting a car, or Cerakote, you will ask any of those people in any of those industries and they'll tell you the exact same thing. Prep is key, always. So with that being said, stop trying to shortcut stuff. Rant over. And now the moment you've all been waiting for. Let's roll the bloopers. So let's talk about... So we're going to answer that question, and I'm going to answer... I almost said, we're going to answer that question, and I'm going to answer the question. That question and talk about dipping 3D printed and materials that are used for 3D printing. All you have to do is find a hydro dipping paint that has the same color, paint it that color, and then you'll keep the same color. That doesn't make any sense. It all keeps the color of the color because color is made of color. Rant over. God, it drives me insane when people try to shortcut stuff. Oh my God.